have any questions for the panelists, please use the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, which will be available throughout the session. Please type your question in the panel provided. The interviewer will then pose those questions to our guest author during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session. Finally, please watch your inbox for invitations to join these webinars, and enjoy the session.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We're very excited to be with you this evening, wherever you are in your lounges across the world, and particularly at this time, it really is very, very meaningful for us to be able to present this to you, and also to this particular subject, which really is about people in hiding. It's about people not literally in hiding, but in hiding in terms of their secrets and in terms of their isolation. And it is going to be my pleasure this evening to discuss with the author of this remarkable book, everyone is present, her road to writing this book, and to give you a sense of this book. Terry Kurgan, who is our honored guest this evening, is an artist and writer based in Johannesburg. Her artistic interest is in vernacular and family photographs, and she explores through a diverse body of multimedia artwork and writing. She has exhibited and published widely in South Africa and internationally, and over the years has received numerous prestigious fine art awards. Recently, Terry turned to what she called creative nonfiction, to uncover her family history, which has been passed down through generations, impacting her own experience of the world. Her book, Everyone is Present, was shortlisted for the 2019 Photo Arles Book Prize, was selected as a finalist for the 2019 USA-based National Jewish Book Awards, and has recently won what is considered to be South Africa's premier nonfiction literary prize, the 2019 Sunday Times Alan Paton Award. She's currently a research associate at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and she supervises Masters in Creative Writing program at the same university, and is co-director with Bronwyn Law-Viljoen of the independent publishing project Fourth Wall Books. By way of orientating you this evening and giving you a taste of the book, Terry is going to introduce the book and talk about some of the images in the book through a presentation that she's prepared for you. This will last about 10 minutes or so, and then after that we will move into the discussion around the book, and also we will be dealing with your questions towards the end. So we look forward very much to those questions. I see already that some questions have appeared on the Q&A screen on my computer. Please do not hesitate to write them up. I hope I'll get to as many as I can, and if needs be, we will intersperse your questions in the course of the discussion as well. So thank you very much, and we look forward to a wonderful evening together. Terry, over to you.
There we go. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
hello.
all fine.
Pardon?
All fine.
All fine. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you, Richard, for that introduction. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I thought it might make this more interesting to everybody if I just briefly gave you a sense of where this project arose from within my art practice. I'm principally a visual artist, as Richard explained, and my practice over many years has been focused on family and vernacular, ordinary, everyday, domestic photography, particularly the way in which these stories mediate our experience of ourselves in the world and the stories we tell about the past. My work, even when it's not photography, for example, when it's drawing, is always about photography. This book is much more personal than previous bodies of work, and was an attempt to try a different medium in an approach to certain preoccupations that have been with me for as long as I can remember, certain things that have always haunted my work. And many of the images contained in the book and images that I write about have crept into other bodies of work in other forms. There've been drawings, there've been prints, there've been some video installation, many other forms. I thought that it might be interesting to show you, before I do a brief reading of a section of a chapter, the physical objects in which this project originated. And before I share my screen, just to say that when I work with photography, I use photographs as both evidence, literal physical evidence, and as a portal, a gateway, that enables me to go places that I can layer over this evidence with, in this case, sort of writerly imagination. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. There we go. Okay. So, you know, many years ago, before I was able to really focus on this material with the attention that I've given it now, my mother handed me the first 2 years of my grandfather's diaries. And this gives you a sense, this slide gives you a sense of just a small amount of the enormous body of work that these diaries became over many years. He must have been writing in these diaries every day before the war. We only have them from the 1st of September 1939. And he kept these up very actively through most of his life, more sporadically in the last years of his life. But had my mother, Leonia Kurgan, not taken care of these for many years and translated them and drawn my attention to them, I wouldn't have had the gift that this project became. My grandfather took a sort of, there were a small number of photographs that survived their lives before the war. And between these diaries and the photographs, this sort of handful of photographs, I used this as the raw material upon which I base my book, Everyone is Present. Let me show you just a couple of the photographs. Each of these photographs was used to circulate an essay in the book around. And each of these photographs became that word that I used, a portal, a tunnel back to a life that is entirely sort of gone and lost, but it enabled me to do an enormous amount of research beyond the edges of each of these frames. What I thought that I'd do is read you a section from the 4th essay in the book, which is called Street View, to give you a sense of how I work with and about and around photographs. I'm beginning in the middle of the chapter somewhere, and my grandfather is alone in his apartment, about to leave. He doesn't know this, but he's leaving it forever. He'll never be back again. His wife and children have gone ahead to the city of Lvov in the east, and he's following them a day or so later. The radio warns people to move into shelters in the event of further attacks from the air. He retrieves his camera from the top drawer of his writing desk, noticing that the 3 drawers underneath it are partly open, and that the chronologically ordered pile of notebooks he filled this year has been overturned. He stacks and reorders the notebooks, and then moves across to the open bay window and pushes the intricately woven damask curtains aside. The pavements and the broad streets below are deserted. It's turning to autumn, and there's just the hint of a chill in the air. The 2 well-tended beds of shrubs and flowers outside the bank Polsky, dark green, reds and violets, some salmon pink and cornflower blue, are all in their last bloom. The doors to the bank have been shuttered and locked. He observes how well polished the double set of brass BP insignia on the middle doors appear in this light. They've forgotten to take in the doormat. In April 1938, the Polish state's largest financial institution adopted a provision to exclude Jews. It has been over a year since he last dusted off his shoes and crossed that white marble threshold. A tall brown dachshund appears. It lifts its back leg and relieves itself against the bottom of the gas streetlight pole before vanishing, tail up at a trot, into the park at the end of the block. The sirens have quieted now, and the broad street below is almost deserted. He knows he should hurry, but it is such a rare pleasure to inhabit the quiet of his home all alone. 2 men walk into his field of vision. They're engrossed in conversation and seem strangely relaxed under the circumstances. They stop to light their cigarettes, and one of them begins to raise his arms. And it is at this moment that my grandfather lifts the camera, chooses his aperture, finds his focus, and composes the shot. The sirens sound again. The men pick up their pace, turn left at the corner, and disappear. The photograph in the album is just 5 by 8 centimeters, and the inscription on the page in white in that spidery hand reads Ulica Sixta. It is late afternoon. We see the clean, wide and empty pavements, the flower beds in the park just beyond them, the domestic garden behind a wrought iron fence, and the solid, functional, heavy sandstone masonry monumentally grounding the bottom of each building. A narrow path of bright sunlight running between them interrupts the very deep shadows that they cast. My grandfather was photographing the street, but what rivets my attention are the 2 men dwarfed by the massive architecture that dominates the frame, and by the distance from which he took the shot, the indistinct expressions on their blurred out faces, and then most particularly, the ambiguous gesture of the man on the right. I scan the little photograph at a high resolution and zoom in on the detail I'm straining to see. They're both holding cigarettes. The man on the left is just bringing his up towards his mouth for another good draw, while the man on the right is holding his in his left hand with his arms raised in surrender. Both men appear to be looking directly up and at my grandfather, but I wonder whether at this moment of capture he's also looking at them. He was famously extremely short-sighted, and everything at a distance would have appeared to him in a blur. Perhaps the man is trying to attract his attention, or marking his presence in front of the lens, or perhaps he is waving, or taunting, or warning. As I enlarge the photograph to the point just before it dissolves into a 2-dimensional grid of pixels, my inability to uncover the meaning of that gesture is perhaps part of the meaning of that time. It's very clear that the man with his arms up in the air is looking directly up at the man in an open bay window, and I want to be able to see what he sees. My grandmother's Polish identity book, issued in 1936, records her home address as number 10 Ulica Teodora Sixta, Bielsko. I type this into Google Street View, and within a matter of seconds, I'm in color, in bright summer weather, and, as I'm soon to discover, dead in front of their original front door. Google must have been here at more or less the same time of day, and judging by the trees which are in leaf, in a similar season. The afternoon sun still envelops that bank building, And while the road is paved with different materials, the gas street lamp is gone and the bank's name and external light fittings have changed. The late summer flower beds my grandfather was admiring just outside the right-hand edge of this frame are still there, and the door up those stairs to the building are still shuttered. I move the image in a circular motion towards the left and bring it closer towards me. A strange, distorted sense of depth comes from the panoramic stitched-together view. I notice pots of deep red geraniums peering over the lyrically ornamental top right-hand balustrade. Peering up at the apartments, I long to know which one it was. I try to zoom in more closely and find a position parallel to the front door. I want to see the doorbells and name plaques and perhaps the exact brass door handle they would so frequently have touched. But no matter how carefully I deploy the technology, this is as close as I can get. That pole is always in the way of a more direct line of sight. Janina Molson, artistic dressmaker, creator of wedding gowns and business suits, reads the sign. I zoom into the window on the left, but the faint promise of a glimpse of Janina at her sewing machine or methodically pinning up the hemline of a wedding dress behind those pink and yellow fabric flowers disintegrates into vivid color-filled squares, and once again my view is frustrated. I scour the facade of the building for clues. There is a close-up cropped view of one of 4 curved bay windows set into the building in which my family once lived. It has slipped through the dispassionate impersonality of Google's net. On this warm summer's day, the window is wide open and a sun-drenched white muslin curtain has billowed outside of it and is moving with the breeze. The image speaks about the interior and beckons me inside. I can easily imagine somebody just beyond this curtain. Perhaps they're eating breakfast in a sunbeam at the table in the room. But my high-resolution screen won't let me in. And the chapter, I continue to take a walk around the neighborhood and a walk around the block. But I won't take up any more time reading. I hope that has piqued your curiosity for now. Okay.
There we go. Terry, it's wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And the book, I hope people understand that the book is in fact a work of art. It is more than just another family memoir. It is more than a collection of essays. It's more than all the substance that it has in its parts. And it's a handsome book. It's beautifully arranged, beautifully designed, and certainly it is the vehicle for this extraordinary story, which is full of spaces between, if I may say so, spaces which we as the readers are invited to explore with you. And that I found so exciting. So my first point really is to ask you, what was this departure for you into what you called creative nonfiction, or what is known as creative nonfiction? And perhaps you could just explain that a little bit to us so that we understand more of what your journey was in this sense.
Okay. You know, the project that, I'll answer your question directly, but my taking this sort of writerly path, I credit my close friend and now partner in a small publishing project, Bronwyn Law Fu Yun. I was one of the authors of Fourth Wall Books some years ago, and I just finished another long-term project, which was in fact also about migration and refugees, forced migration and refugees, but it was about residents of our very own city of Johannesburg. It was about refugees and migrants. The project began around about the first sort of phase of xenophobic attacks in 2008. And I won't waste time telling you about that. But as that, which became a book called Hotel Yeovil, was coming off the press, Bronwyn Lawful Yun said to me, "What's next?" And I told her about the great generosity of my mother, who had just then handed me the diaries and the photographs to take care of, and you know, to begin thinking about a project in relation to. And she said to me, "Come and do this in the creative writing department and work, you know, the way you do with images and text, images in relation to text." And, you know, I realized that, you know, much of the writing that I had done up until then was creative nonfiction. It was always quite a sort of personal, intimate way of writing. Even though I often publish in academic journals, I never write in academic language. So to me, creative nonfiction incorporates writing techniques, to answer your question, Richard, that are more closely associated with literary fiction. And by this I mean writing that makes use of the narrative styles and elements of fiction and poetry. It's often also called narrative nonfiction or literary nonfiction. But for me, the best creative nonfiction reads like a novel. You know, there are facts upon which it's based, but the book reads like a novel, emphasizing narrative and storylines, and is layered over with writerly imagination. In the passage I just read, I have no way of knowing whether my grandfather saw those things, but I have his photograph. And based upon that photograph, I can try and imagine the world outside his window.
And in a sense, insert yourself into that world,
Yes.
which is what I think is so amazing, because that's in fact what I kept feeling as I was reading the book, that whilst you were inserting yourself into that world, you were inserting us into that world too. And we kind of were on this journey with you together, this journey of discovery. And the way in which you write is not to reveal everything. It kind of unfolds, as you say, like a narrative, like a story. It's not just a series of facts. And you're giving us that there's an emotional component to it, and a dramatic component, which is very, very exciting. Professor of Contemporary Literature at Queen Mary University of London, Andrew van der Vlies, did a wonderful review of your book. And he describes your book as a deeply personal meditation on authorship, memory, and photography. And of course, the photographs are one layer. The diary of your grandfather is a second layer. Your narrative is a third layer. And then your reflection on your narrative, because you self-reflect all the way through, that's almost the fourth layer. And then we as the reader are the fifth layer. And for me, that was the richness of the experience. If I can ask you about the issue of memory and photography. You, obviously, this is a very personal story. It's a story about your family. It also is a story which reveals family secrets. These are things that people don't often talk about. And in fact, your grandparents never spoke about it. And the diaries, you suggest that your father, your grandfather never intended people to read the diaries. Yet your mother took this brave step to pass them on to you, a creative person. And you said that you have lived with the ghosts of these photographs, the ghosts of these stories. They've been lurking in your consciousness all the time. They've gone into other works, the work on refugees, which, I mean, that's what your grandparents were. They were refugees. All of that is there. So how has your family received the work? How have they felt about the journey that you've been on and making public what is really a very private story? How has that been for you and for your family?
Well, well, for me, let me begin with my own feeling about this. You mentioned, I mean, most families have secrets, and this book engages, I suppose, what is commonly come to be understood as intergenerational transmission. What the psychoanalysts Abraham and Turok called the phantom. I mean, the thing that haunts, and Nicholas Abraham famously said that what haunts are not the dead, but the gaps left within us by the secrets of others. And I said earlier on, this has been with me for as long as I can remember, but delivered into my unconscious, I'm absolutely certain. This content that I mine through my grandfather's diaries and the photographs has been there, and inherited in my DNA at a cellular level, bred in the bone. I haven't personally suffered the scale of loss that my grandparents or my then little mother, she was 4 years old when they fled, suffered. But all of this, is what I've tried to explore and tease out in writing this book. My family, largely, I think the book has been most complicated for my mother, since this was her own experience, and she's written her own memoir. And my version of it doesn't always tally with what she with her own interpretation of things. And going back to your comments about memory and photography, I've got a wonderful quotation up on the wall in front of me, which comes out of an incredible memoir written by a formerly Hungarian, but now living, I think, in the UK somewhere, a poet and writer called George Zirtis, who wrote a memoir. It's also a memoir that is to do with the Holocaust and his parents' Holocaust experience. And he reels backwards through his own mother's life. I read it after I'd finished my own book, but I love this. He says this: knowledge is partly invention, memory is mostly invention, and knowledge of another is invention in the highest degree. I don't make it up, but the person at the core of it all still has to be constructed and understood in terms of invention. The trick is to invent the truth. And I'm reading that because, all the time that I was working on this book, I was provoking, I hope I'm provoking for the reader, questions about the authority of biography, photography, narrative, and memoir. I mean, photographs are not facts, neither are. Everybody remembers a situation entirely differently. My sister and I often have very interesting conversations where we have entirely different memories of the same childhood, and so on. So I've sort of sidetracked a bit. I don't know whether you want to bring me back to the point, Richard.
Well, let me bring you back just by really asking you to talk to us a little bit about the 3 quotes that you open your book with. Because okay. I think they're instructive for us. It's the Sebald, the Freud, and the one which I would like to read by Jenny Erpenbeck, if I may. Yes. And then for us just to talk a little bit about, because I think they really sum up kind of the journey in a way. You write, Jenny Erpenbeck writes, he carries around with him a vast, dark land. All the stories his mother never told him or that she hid from him. Perhaps he carries with him even those stories his mother never knew or heard of. He can't get rid of them, but he can't lose them either, since he doesn't even know them, since all of this lies buried deep within him. For when he slipped from his mother's womb, he was already filled with interior spaces that didn't belong to him. And I think that goes back to what you were saying about, you know, you felt that it was in your DNA.
Yeah.
But you go on to talk about photographs. Sebald makes reference to photographs, and Freud makes reference to photographs. And I think those are really very, very instructive. So perhaps you can just reflect on why you chose those and maybe talk about what they said to you and how that impacts upon the book.
Well, you know, Jenny Erpenbeck is a wonderful contemporary German writer based in Berlin. I think she's in her late 50s. And most of her writing until recently has focused on, you know, the traumatic history of the 20th century, most of it based in Germany. And even though she would have been born after the war, she tells the history of that whole century. And I think this really spoke to me because, you know, it's describing exactly what I'm talking about, you know, the things that are delivered into your unconscious at birth. And it's very common, you know, my grandparents did not discuss the past, and they certainly didn't discuss it with my mother. And you know, I'm the generation that then interprets and explores these things in my own way, you know, and to my own ends. I mean, the Sebald quote about photographs, shall I read it?
Yes, it's wonderful.
Okay, so it's a short quotation. One has the impression, she said, of something stirring in them, as if one caught small sighs of despair. Gémissement de désespoir was her expression. As if the photographs had a memory of their own and remembered us, remembered the roles that we, the survivors, and those no longer among us had played in our former lives. And I suppose, you know, that really spoke to me in terms of the stories that I drew out of the photographs. And when some of you have read the book and some of you haven't, but when you come to read the book, you'll see that I forensically explore each photograph, mining them for detail, mining them for information about past lives, about history. They're very ordinary, everyday photographs. In fact, they're largely of my family's last summer holiday in the Tatra Mountains in Zakopane. That's in the southwest of Poland. The family used to go there. The mothers, the maids, and the children would set up for 3 months in the summer, and the husbands who lived and worked close enough by would join them for weekends. And so these are the most beautiful, idyllic photographs of a last summer holiday. One of the photographs masks a secret that is sort of threaded through the book. But, you know, I have always been preoccupied with the impossibility of ever fixing the meaning of a photographic image. You come to it with your own subjective experience. You desire it to tell certain stories. You need it to affirm relationships. You know, photographs perform many complicated tasks, and what I'm most interested in many of the essays that I write is what my grandfather photographer might have wanted from his subjects, and I offer suggestions about what that might have been. I will never know. You know.
I found when I was reading your descriptions of the photographs, because the essays, in a sense, are an expansion of the photograph in each of the chapters.
Yeah.
And I found that the description was prompting me, first of all, to look very closely at the photograph itself. And then it did something very interesting. I found myself actually trying to solve some of your questions. I found myself trying to find the answers somewhere, looking very looking at those photographs. And of
Yeah.
course, it was the spaces between which you were
Yeah.
looking at too, and the
Yeah.
secrets, the
Yeah.
dance of the people, the way they were posed. Well, they weren't posed. Many of the photographs are very spontaneous,
Yes.
very beautifully, not very composed. And whilst you say that your grandfather wasn't a very good photographer, he was a very honest photographer in a way. There was something very, very, very candid about the photography, and I think his diaries too, the way in which he writes. What is for me really, really very, very strange, I think, and also very wonderful, is that you take us along this journey, and it reveals itself in a way in bite-sized chunks. It's not a chronological narrative per se. It is a series of jigsaw pieces which sometimes fit and sometimes don't fit, and it's really, for us, I found that very exciting. Your grandfather as a character, as the protagonist, if you will, in the piece, since it's his diary and his photographs, is a really fascinating man, wonderful, complex man, and he becomes an analytic chemist, and yet a productive, what do they call it, a chemist who manufacturing chemist, exactly. But you also reveal that he wanted to become a psychoanalyst, and that he in a sense, through these diaries and through these photographs, it looks like he was trying to deal with his life, to analyze his life, and as a chemist, he was trying to put it all together. He didn't want anybody to read it, but he had to kind of work on it the whole time, these diaries, which he kept going and kept going, mostly in Polish, little bit of German, some English, but all his life just about. And I wondered how your view of him had changed as you encountered his writing and you really, really delved into these photographs. How did your feeling towards him alter in that reading?
Well, it was, my grandfather died a most extraordinary conscious death at which I was present at the age of 15. And he was always, he was a scientist, but the rational world, definitely didn't supply him with all the answers that he needed with regard to the meaning of life. And he was always interested in occult, and I write about it. He was Jewish, but not observant. That wasn't the religion that drove him. He was interested in Eastern, in mysticism and other things. But he was a very retiring. I was fairly close to him as a child, but it was a non-verbal relationship, if you know what I mean. So the diaries were extraordinary. My mother my grandmother had attempted to translate the first year of the diaries, entirely in her own favor, editing out anything critical of herself, which my mom discovered when she took the first and the second year to a more neutral translator some years later. I think it was somebody in the US. But then when I've had all 25 years of the diaries translated now, and they were translated by someone who, and it will take too much time to explain all these coincidences, and I see it's already 20 to 9. They were translated by someone who came from the very next village. My mother was born in Lwów on the east of Poland, and he came from, Lwów was a big city, and he came from the village closest to Lwów, and he was born the same year as my mom. And he was completely obsessed with the history of the 20th century, a retired Polish, not Jewish, Polish physician in Johannesburg. And he sort of week after week, month after month, handed me handed me these translations, and because he was an intellectual and he understood so many of my grandfather's references, he would often in brackets explain things to me in case I wouldn't understand the reference. And so it was a wonderful process, you know, but the diaries are, you know, they are, I mean, I reflect in the book as to why he might have needed to keep them. You know, they were like a secret life, a private space, you know, but they were largely quite banal, quite obsessive records of the manner in which he spent each day. And I've often thought that was possibly because he valued himself so little. You know, he didn't value himself enough, and he didn't feel he was living the wrong life in so many ways. You know, not only because of the trauma of the Holocaust and losing their entire community, their homes. I don't need to tell you what they lost. He also, you know, he had an incredibly domineering father. I don't think he was ever able to assert himself in relation to his father or his wife. The book is about a very complicated relationship. I wanted to say, when you were talking about the photographs earlier, my grandmother is almost never looking straight at him, making eye contact with him the way I am with you now. She's always, he's looking at her. It never seems to me that she gives him back what it is that he's asking for with that camera. But getting back to your question, the diaries were extremely revealing. I kept compiling. He read all the time, and very quickly in English. I mean, one of the first books that he read upon arriving in South Africa in English in 1940. In 1944, he was reading The Tempest, Shakespeare's The Tempest on Muizenberg Beach. So it was an extraordinary reading list and recipes, and then some very painful internal life stuff. So I do feel like I have a better understanding of him, and perhaps of all of my psychic inheritance in terms of his impact on my mother, her impact on me, my impact on my own children. It's explained certain things to me.
It is. It does indeed. It explains to us. It certainly explains to us, the readers, the complexity, the layers of the relationships, and in a sense how you fit into it too. Because there is, in a sense, a kind of autobiographical element to the book, which I found also incredibly honest and incredibly, in a sense, engaging. Because you take us with you on this journey. And I love the fact that the book is kind of bookended by this amazing hotel in Zakopane, and the research that takes you into your cousin's Arthur's memoirs, and also the information that he gives you. I mean, and you know that in your research, I know because you've told me that it was a really amazing and exciting revelation. Perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about that now.
So Arthur is my mother's cousin, my mother's first cousin, second cousin. And on a research trip to Poland, so I think it was you and I were talking about my research process at some other time, and I was telling you that one of the most surprising things that I uncovered in my research was on a research trip to Poland, when I came across an audio archive of Holocaust survivor testimonies, which had been recorded in the early 1990s, but had never been made available online. And amongst them, this was in a museum in Warsaw, by the way, amongst them was a 3 or 4 hour recording made by my mother's cousin, Arthur Rose, whose childhood memory of a single fact, the name of the hotel that they had holidayed in year after year in the Tatra Mountains, enabled me to construct the whole first section, the whole first 3 essays of the book, because he located it, and the hotel is still there, the external facade of it exactly as it was in 1939. And about Arthur, I'd grown up with the story, something like this. you know, I must have been told it often as a child, but this is what it turned into in my mind, that during the war, after their parents were shot by the Gestapo, 10-year-old Arthur had walked his 6-year-old sister all the way across Europe to family in London. Now, in fact, what this recording revealed was that their parents had sent their 2 young children out of the Lvov ghetto. They were hidden inside mail bags in a truck and into hiding alone with an elderly Christian couple, a former colleague of Arthur's father, who'd agreed to hide them at a price, at a big price. And they themselves, the parents, were hiding elsewhere in the city under even more difficult circumstances. And amongst other things, the recordings that were so extraordinary described 2 years of the young children enduring the most extraordinary deprivation and suffering, during which time this 9-year-old took the most heroic responsibility. And although the children didn't know it until the war ended, their parents had been betrayed, rousted out of their hiding place, and they were shot by the Gestapo. So all the time the children were in hiding, they thought their parents were still alive. But the story, to conclude this, the story of their 2 years in hiding was a surprising discovery. And it was very important for me because my book, if it's about anything, it elucidates how difficult it is to arrive at the truth, and is precisely about the facts and the fiction that eventually do become family truths. My point being that the stories of Arthur's courage and daring had been invented so that it fit him perfectly.
It did, and just I mean, without giving away the ending of the book, because I think it's quite dramatic in many ways. Can you just describe how your relationship with Poland changed over the course of the study of this book, and also you could touch on your grandfather's relationship with Poland, because I found that absolutely fascinating as well.
Well, you know, Poland seemed to me as a child growing up, and right up until 2014, when I was on a residency for 4 months in Berlin, I was working on another project. It seemed as far away as the moon, you know. And my husband spent some time with me in Berlin, and we rented a car, and we got in a car, and 8 hours later, we were in Zakopane. It was unbelievable. I thought it was a place you could never get to. So my first trip was quite extraordinary, and it was to the hotel that Arthur remembered, and my mother had made a connection for us with an extraordinary man whom I write about in the book. But the extraordinary trip was the one that I did together with my mother the next year, where we actually go back to the building that she left in 1939. And I write about it, so I don't want to spoil it. But it was an extraordinary trip. It was an extraordinary trip. I mean, you know, in spite of everything that happened, it seemed to me, it made her extremely happy to be back, to be eating this familiar food, to be walking the streets, there were certain things as young as she was that she remembered. And I loved being there. I'd love to go back again. I'd love to explore it again. So, the Poles are, it's not a warm and friendly place. Nobody's warm and fuzzy. I know I'm stereotyping, but I didn't enjoy being in Warsaw. I didn't enjoy the train journey. So it's just, and particularly now the politics of the country are again so incredibly authoritarian and right wing, but it has been an incredibly interesting journey. Exploring the diaries, following tracks that had been laid down for me by my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, the photographs, the diaries, it's put something to rest. Yeah.
Right. I know it's a strange thing because we're coming towards the end of our time. We'll go into the Q&A in a minute. But one last thing, and that is just the title of the book. It is actually a line in the book. It comes out of your description of when your grandfather goes back to the factory, and he wants to pay the workers and so on, and everyone is present. So it's there in the book, but it's so much more than that, because of course, if you're talking about Poland, it evokes the feelings of, well, you know, everybody was present, everybody was watching what was happening. There's so many things, but maybe you would just like to talk about your choice of title.
I think for me, it means that each one of us, me, you, every one of us is the sum total of everybody who came before, you know, and I really feel that, you know, I feel like, you know, I'm very much a product, and that, you know, it's that intergenerational stuff, what's delivered into the unconscious. I'm working on another project at the moment. I'm at the very beginning of another book project on the Lithuanian side, on my father's side of the family now. But I really do think, you know, everyone is present in me, in you, and make us who we are. Psychic inheritance.
Yes,
I've always
absolutely.
been interested in psychoanalysis myself, you know.
So people who are listening, I would very much value your questions. You've got some time now. I'm just going to read one from Canada here. And in some ways you've answered some of it, but maybe you could just go into a little bit more detail. This is from Marianne Kaplan from Quadra Island in Canada. And she says, my question is about the artistic incorporation of the photo imagery into the design of the textual component of the book. Please describe your intention and process here. So you have talked a little bit about it, but maybe you can just articulate that again.
Okay. Well, you know, for 4 books to begin with, as a publisher, and I mean, before I became a partner in this small, very small project, we were working on this book, and through the process of working on this book, I now work on other people's books as well. But for 4 books is all about, you know, photography and writing, and then being sort of equivalent in value. And Marianne's question, I wanted the photographs and the text to be, I wanted the photographs to be read in much the same way as the text. And so I often bring you, you know, sort of closer and closer up. Let me find an example of that. You know, if I'm writing about a detail, I might, you know, I might hone in on it on the page. I wanted the reader to read images in the same way that I, the writer, was reading these images, and as I say, equal value.
Well, that really is bringing us towards the end of our time together. But if I may, I'm going to insert another question, because I'm using my prerogative here. And I want to ask you, your grandfather seems to have had a compulsion to write and a compulsion to record through photographs his life. The book suggests for me that there was a necessary process for your grandfather to record a world, which in many ways he was struggling to understand, it seems. He was part of your childhood, and yet you have also inherited this compulsion to write and to photograph and to deal with your life in this way, and also the issues around you, whether it be refugees or whatever. You are taking that very special responsibility. Is that part of that transgenerational thing, or is it something which comes from living in South Africa, dealing with the kind of issues that we're dealing with, perhaps which they didn't, because after all, they were refugees coming into a new space? What has been that motivation?
Well, just to, my grandfather wasn't a photographer. I've sort of spun this tale in relation to a small handful of photographs that survived. He was like, in fact, a terrible photographer, and all his photographs were out of focus. These are remarkable, he wasn't a photographer, but he certainly, you're correct, he had a compulsion, a sort of neurotic compulsion to record the passage of each day, you know. And as I say, they're mostly incredibly banal recordings, but of huge interest to somebody like me in terms of what I can make of them, you know, what I can craft from them, what I can glean from them, understand from them, read between the lines. I don't think I don't think that's the writing and the interest in photography are transmitted. I think other more complicated, perhaps less flattering aspects of my personality have been transmitted. But I've forgotten the rest of your question. I got sidetracked.
All right. I think it was fine. I was going to say that, you know, do you feel some of that kind of compulsion to do that kind of?
Oh yeah, I feel it. I know what the compulsion for me is, that I'm, you know, they say there's one in every family. I'm obsessed with objects that have their roots in the past. You know, for me, in fact, I was going to call the book Object Lesson, and it has one of the essays, but Object Lesson is too commonly used as a title, but one of the essays is called Object Lesson, and it's about plunder, and it's about things, and how, you know, when a hole is being torn in the world, you know, a thing comes to represent, you know, much more than itself. And I find the few objects that are left from the past, and the photographs, and all the evidence, an incredible gateway to my imagination on the one hand, and to my ability to research and uncover and mine that evidence, you know. I mean, a photograph is never anything more or less than evidence. It's never a fact or a truth or it could be this, it could be that. It's evidence that you need to interpret. And you'll always interpret it in terms of your own subjectivity.
That's right. Well, one of our listeners, one of our participants this evening, Laura, she writes the following. She says, "Hi, Terry. What a fascinating interview. I'm intrigued by the title because it seems to be also to be about people being present and absent, and being aware and unaware. And it is those contrary states that go right the way through the book, and which make it the most compulsive and wonderful read at every level. I really would encourage everybody to try and get hold of the book. I think that it is something which evokes in us our own searching. It's not just a memoir. It's not just a family history. It's so much more. And it really has been one of the finest books I've read this year. So I just want to thank you, Terry, for really a wonderful, wonderful read and a wonderful book. It really adds to us, to our understanding of a time. We've got some lovely comments. Thank you so much. What a fascinating discussion. Look forward to reading the book. That's from Patricia Schonstein, also an author. Somebody else says, a fascinating discussion of your process and the intergenerational transmission. Psychoanalysts. So really very interesting and wonderful evening. That was from Dominique Malherbe. And Terry, thank you so much. We have to say goodbye. Good night.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Jewish Literary Festival. Thank you, everybody.
A warm thank you to our presenters this evening. If you wish to order books, please contact the Book Lounge on booklounge@gmail.com, or call them on 021 462 2425 to arrange a pickup or delivery. You can also order Terry's book on Amazon.com. To our audience, for your support of the Jewish Literary Festival, to the sponsors and donors of JLF 2020, to Natasha Skarek for technical coordination, and to the JLF team for program coordination, our grateful thanks. A reminder to watch your email inbox and diarise next Thursday, the 21st of May at 8 p.m. for our next webinar, when internationally acclaimed UK author Thomas Harding will be talking about his book, Legacy, One Family, A Cup of Tea, and the Company That Took on the World. We look forward to your joining us again. Good night and stay safe.